Yes, I with your nigga. Yes, I was with your nigga last week. Yes, I love your nigga. Yes, he nutted in me. Yes, I'm pregnant.
A woman was fatally shot at the Wesley Square Apartments on Calhoun. Police say two women were in a fight in the parking lot when one of them produced a gun and shot the other before fleeing. The woman who was shot self-transported herself to a local hospital where she was pronounced deceased. Investigators say they are following up with a potential witness and say they may have an idea who the suspect is.
At approximately 12:45 a.m. on Sunday, February 8, 2026, 26-year-old Asia Monet Stewart was fatally shot at the Wesley Square Apartments on Calhoun Road in the Sunnyside neighborhood of Houston, Texas, during an altercation in the parking lot. Stewart, a mother of four, had just completed a long overnight security shift and was reportedly intervening in a dispute among acquaintances when the confrontation escalated. In the weeks that followed, Houston Police Department homicide investigators traced eyewitness accounts and physical evidence, leading to the identification and eventual arrest of 25-year-old Dasha Wilmore, who was charged with murder in connection with Stewart's death. Investigators are continuing to piece together what began as a physical conflict among several women and ended in gunfire, examining witness statements, forensic material recovered at the scene, and digital information to understand motive and sequence of events. Every case starts with evidence and works toward the truth. We rely on verified facts, documented timelines, and official records, not speculation or sensationalism. Subscribe to stay updated as we examine each case clearly, carefully, and professionally. Shortly before 12:45 a.m. on Sunday, February 8, 2026, Houston Police Department, HPD, dispatchers received a call reporting a shooting at the Wesley Square Apartments complex on Calhoun Road in the Sunnyside neighborhood of Houston, Texas. Patrol units were dispatched immediately to the scene in response to the call. Upon arrival, officers located a wounded adult female in the parking lot of the apartment complex. The victim was not actively moving and exhibited signs consistent with having sustained a gunshot wound. EMS units, which were also responding to the call, assisted law enforcement in documenting the scene and conducting initial assessments of the victim's condition. Law enforcement secured the perimeter of the crime scene to preserve evidence and prevent contamination by bystanders. Officers immediately initiated standard homicide scene procedures, including photographing the environment, marking evidence locations, and maintaining a secure perimeter as detectives from HPD's Homicide Division were notified and en route. The injured woman was transported to a nearby medical facility via private vehicle, as reported by police sources. Once at the hospital, medical personnel conducted further assessment. The victim was subsequently pronounced deceased by attending physicians after emergency treatment efforts were concluded. Law enforcement later identified the victim as 26-year-old Asia Monet Stewart. At the scene, officers conducted a systematic sweep of the parking lot and adjacent areas. Multiple spent 9mm shell casings were observed lying on the pavement. These were photographed in place and then collected and logged as physical evidence to be processed later by forensic specialists. There were visible signs of physical struggle, including displaced personal items and disturbed debris, consistent with an altercation occurring prior to the shooting. Medical and investigative personnel documented all physical evidence at the scene. Ballistics technicians were summoned to catalog the shell casings and any other firearm-related remnants discovered at the location. Investigators and crime scene technicians also canvassed for potential witnesses, obtaining preliminary statements from individuals who had been present at the time of the shooting. These initial investigative activities established the foundation for a homicide investigation. Officers initiated follow-up to identify possible suspects, track witness accounts, and collect physical and digital evidence that might clarify the sequence of events leading to the shooting. Asia Monet Stewart was a resident of Houston's Sunnyside community and was 26 years old at the time of her death. According to public statements from family members provided to media outlets, Stewart was the mother of 4 children, with ages reported as 11, 8, 6, and 3. Family members described Stewart's daily routine as involving extended work hours. She was employed as a security guard, which often required long shifts. On the day of her death, Stewart had reportedly completed a 16-hour shift prior to traveling to the apartment complex where the fatal incident occurred. Accounts provided by those familiar with Stewart indicated that she had maintained regular contact with her family and children, managing parental responsibilities alongside her employment. The nature of her work as a security guard placed her in an occupation with variable hours and often required her to operate in environments where conflict resolution and observational skills were necessary. Friends and associates who were interviewed by authorities as part of background checks on stakeholders in the incident characterized Stewart as an individual who typically did not initiate confrontations. Prior investigative reporting indicated that acquaintances recalled her as someone who preferred to diffuse situations rather than escalate them, consistent with descriptions of her behavior in prior, unrelated social interactions. These background elements establish her profile as an adult engaged in familial and occupational responsibilities. Her presence at the Wesley Square apartments in the early hours of February 8, 2026, was contextualized by investigators as a response to an ongoing dispute involving members of her social circle and family, rather than a premeditated visit to the location. Following the securement of the crime scene, forensic units initiated comprehensive analysis to catalog and interpret the evidence recovered. The ballistic remnants, consisting of multiple 9mm shell casings, were transported to the HBD Forensic Laboratory for further analysis. Technicians logged each casing into evidence and prepared them for ballistic matching against potential suspect weapons. Investigators also recovered fragments of personal property near the spent casings, including footwear prints, fragments of clothing fibers, and what appear to be items displaced during the altercation. These personal items were processed with appropriate chain of custody procedures and later examined for biological and trace evidence. Crime scene measurements, including distances between the casings and the victim's final resting location, were documented using laser measurement tools and standardized photography. This documentation allowed forensic analysts to reconstruct the physical dynamics of the confrontation. The configuration of shell casings suggested multiple shots were fired from a location proximal to the victim, consistent with a close-range exchange. Ballistics analysis confirmed that all collected shell casings were fired from a 9mm caliber firearm, though the specific make and model of the weapon would require submission of a test firearm or suspect weapon for definitive comparison. The forensic team prioritized matching these casings to any firearms subsequently recovered during the investigation. In addition to ballistic evidence, forensic photogrammetry enhanced investigators' ability to map the scene in 3 dimensions, providing an accurate spatial representation of the altercation. Crime scene photos, video documentation, and measurements were integrated into a digital model to support investigative hypotheses and future courtroom presentation, if necessary. Blood spatter analysts also examined patterns on the pavement and nearby structures to determine point of origin of shots fired and to distinguish between entry and exit trajectories. These analyses were layered with witness statements to form a coherent assessment of how the gunfire occurred. Through this forensic examination, investigators established a factual basis for the trajectory of events in the immediate moments before and after the shooting, providing law enforcement with critical evidence to support suspect identification and potential charges. In the days leading up to the shooting, police incident logs and witness statements indicated a series of disputes and physical altercations among groups of women in and around the Wesley Square Apartments complex. HBD records reflected reports of verbal confrontations escalating to physical interactions, though not all resulted in formal police reports. These interactions were documented by detectives during follow-up interviews with residents of the complex. Law enforcement canvases conducted after the shooting identified witnesses who reported observing heated exchanges at the complex over several days before the incident. These interactions sometimes involved threats and aggressive gestures. While none of the prior confrontations before February 8th had resulted in law enforcement intervention, patrol officers noted the tensions when conducting follow-up community checks. Investigators determined that Stewart had arrived at the complex in part to support her sister, who reportedly had been involved in these escalating confrontations. This information was corroborated by multiple witness accounts and family statements taken during investigative interviews. These interpersonal dynamics among the involved parties formed a backdrop of tension that law enforcement later identified as a precursor to the fatal altercation. Although the specific causal link between prior disputes and the shooting would be subject to evidentiary assessment in legal proceedings, the documented interactions informed investigators' understanding of motives and social connections among those present at the scene. As part of the investigative process, HPD homicide detectives issued subpoenas to obtain surveillance camera footage from private and municipal cameras in the vicinity of the Wesley Square apartments. Footage requests included surveillance operated by the apartment complex, doorbell cameras from neighboring residences, and available street cameras covering Calhoun Road and adjacent blocks. Digital evidence analysts reviewed the collected footage to identify movements and interactions of individuals present in the parking lot before, during, and after the shooting. Time-stamped video frames were synchronized with incident reports to establish a chronological sequence of activity. In addition to video, cell phone metadata was analyzed following legal orders obtained by detectives. Communications and location metadata were reviewed to confirm the presence of certain individuals at specific times. This included records of calls and text messages in the critical hours preceding the homicide, along with geolocation data that placed key parties near the complex at the approximate time of the shooting. Analysts also extracted data to identify potential communications indicating plans or warnings made before the incident. This digital evidence provided a corroborative layer to witness statements and physical evidence from the scene, allowing investigators to cross-reference multiple data points in their reconstruction of events. Witnesses interviewed by detectives described an escalation of aggressive behavior and threatening language among certain individuals in the days before the shooting. Several witnesses specifically noted references to a firearm during heated exchanges, though no firearm was publicly displayed prior to the incident. These interactions resulted in heightened wariness among some residents and associates of those involved. According to statements obtained by police, some individuals began avoiding contact with others due to concerns over potential escalation. This behavior was documented during canvas interviews conducted after the shooting. Investigators cataloged these accounts as part of a pattern of conflict that law enforcement analysts would later draw upon when considering motivation and context for the fatal shooting. Although these prior interactions did not directly involve law enforcement intervention at the time, they provided investigative context for understanding the social environment in which the incident unfolded. In the weeks following the early morning shooting at the Wesley Square apartments in Houston's Sunnyside area, homicide investigators with the Houston Police Department, HPD, completed the initial identification process of the primary suspect. Using a double-blind photo array, in which neither the interviewers nor the witnesses knew the suspect's identity, officers presented multiple images to several people who had been at the scene. Witnesses independently identified 25-year-old Dasha Wilmore as the individual seen engaging physically with the victim prior to the fatal discharge of firearm. The corroborating identifications established probable cause for arrest. Following identification, Wilmore was taken into custody by HPD officers for questioning related to the death of 26-year-old Asia Stewart. Detectives initiated a structured interrogation in a secure interview room, adhering to procedural safeguards, including Miranda warnings. The scope of questioning covered multiple discrete areas: Wilmore's physical actions during the confrontation, any prior history or interaction with Stewart on that night or preceding days, and details regarding the possession and handling of a firearm on the evening of the incident. Investigators asked for precise statements about her location at various times, what sequence of events she observed, and whether she saw or handled any weapon. To ensure accuracy, statements from bystanders were systematically cross-referenced with digital evidence. HPD had already served subpoenas for video surveillance in and around Wesley Square apartments, seeking footage captured by external security cameras and any doorbell or cell phone recordings that showed movement of individuals shortly before, during, and after the shooting. Additionally, cell phone metadata and text message timestamps were recovered from several witnesses' devices to construct precise timelines. Digital forensic analysts compared Wilmore's account with these sources to identify inconsistencies or confirm her stated whereabouts. All collected witness statements, physical evidence, and digital data were cataloged for review by prosecutors and defense counsel as mandated by discovery rules governing criminal proceedings. In the final 24-hour period before her death, Asia Stewart followed a routine that culminated in her presence at Wesley Square Apartments in the early morning hours of February 8, 2026. Stewart had completed an overnight work shift as a security guard, totaling approximately 16 hours on duty. The duration and scheduling of her shift placed considerable physical demand on her, but she was not scheduled to work further that day. Shortly after concluding her duties, Stewart traveled by vehicle to the Wesley Square complex on Calhoun Road in Sunnyside in response to information about an ongoing familial dispute involving relatives and acquaintances. Prior to that night, tensions among several individuals who frequented the parking lot of the apartment complex had been observed by local residents. These interactions included raised voices, confrontational body language, and multiple reports of minor physical altercations in the days leading up to the shooting. Although no formal police reports were filed about these earlier interactions, community members described an environment of escalating conflict indicative of unresolved disputes. At some point during the evening before her death, Stewart was informed that the situation might require her intervention. Analysts later determined that her decision to go to Wesley Square was influenced by her familial association with some individuals involved and her perception of needing to assist in de-escalating the argument. After completing the necessary identification procedures and confirming probable cause, law enforcement officers executed a formal arrest of Dasha Wilmore. Wilmore was transported to the Harris County Jail, where she was booked on a charge of murder in connection with the shooting death of Asia Stewart. Booking records included her personal identifiers, alleged offense, and detention status pending further proceedings. Bail conditions, if any, were determined pursuant to Texas statutory requirements for a first-degree felony charge. Following the arrest, HBD released a statement summarizing the status of the investigation. The statement outlined that their homicide unit had identified and apprehended a suspect, detailed the ongoing collection of physical and testimonial evidence, and reiterated a request for any additional information from the public. Law enforcement emphasized that community safety remained priority and that updates would be provided as further investigative steps were completed. As of the most recent updates, the legal proceedings against Wilmore have entered the pretrial stage. Pretrial activities include a sequence of motions, evidence disclosures, and procedural hearings before the case is scheduled for trial. Prosecutors are preparing to introduce a combination of forensic, testimonial, and digital evidence to establish the elements of the offense. This includes physical evidence collected from the crime scene, ballistics analysis regarding the firearm used, witness testimony recounting observed behavior, and digital metadata analyses that corroborate specific movements and communications. Defense counsel is expected to challenge aspects of the prosecution's case, including the interpretation of witness accounts, the reliability of digital evidence, and any alleged procedural errors in the collection or handling of physical materials. Standard defense strategies in cases of this nature may include questioning the credibility of eyewitness identifications, asserting alternative explanations for the sequence of events, and scrutinizing the timelines constructed by prosecution experts. Both sides will have the opportunity to present arguments during pre-trial motions that might result in the suppression of certain evidence or dismissal of specific charges. The matter is scheduled for a future date, when a judge will set deadlines for jury selection and trial proceedings. The eventual verdict and sentencing will be determined by a jury composed of residents from the relevant judicial district in Harris County. Jurors will weigh evidence related to culpability and intent, assessing whether the prosecution has met its burden beyond a reasonable doubt. If convicted of the murder charge, sentencing will follow statutory guidelines under Texas law, which would include a range of penalties up to life imprisonment depending on aggravating or mitigating factors presented during trial. After Stewart's death, community response included local discussions on violence prevention and public safety within Sunnyside. Memorial services were held to acknowledge Stewart's life and the investigative developments surrounding the case. Public calls for enhanced resources for conflict resolution and community intervention programs were also noted in local forums and community meetings, reflecting a broader conversation about addressing interpersonal disputes before they escalate to lethal outcomes. Family statements released through representatives emphasized Stewart's role in her household as a caregiver and provider, highlighting the practical responsibilities she maintained as a mother. In the context of the legal process, such statements are not part of the evidentiary record, but provide insight into the personal impact of the crime on those closest to the victim. The investigation and subsequent arrest continue to shape local dialogues about public safety infrastructure, community policing, and mechanisms for reporting and resolving disputes. Municipal leaders, law enforcement officials, and residents have participated in forums to examine systemic factors contributing to violent confrontations and propose potential strategies aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. Facts verified. Case concluded. Justice is determined by what can be proven. Subscribe for more documented cases and real criminal investigations.